श्री स्वामीनारायण भगवान नी जय। अक्षर पुरुषोत्तम महाराज नी जय। प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज नी जय। महंत स्वामी महाराज नी जय। प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज शताब्दी महोत्सव नी जय. So we're currently studying the Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Jivan Charitra part 1. Now this session will be focusing on assessment K, which is pages from 500 to 555. So we're looking at the years 1969 February to 1970 January. Now the notes in English can be downloaded from myBAPS. The notes have also been very nicely sectioned so that you can also listen to the Gujarati tracks if needed. So we start off in 1969 February. Now Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Bhadra for the preparations for the Murti Pratishta, and one evening Ghanshyam Prasad Swami, who's the Bhandari. Now this is a very interesting incident from the life of Ghanshyam Prasad Swami and his interactions with Pramukh Swami Maharaj. So one evening Ghanshyam Prasad Swami decided to make khichdi. Now normally they would make khichdi with magni dal, but today he was very enthusiastic and he said let's do something different, and he wanted to make khichdi with tuerni dal. Now cooking is an art, and no matter how simple the food item is, and it's one thing to have a zeal to do something, and it's also another to have the skill to do it. Now obviously the enthusiasm was all there, and the way to make khichdi with tuerni dal is a little different to the way we make khichdi with magni dal. And so while preparing the khichdi, what Ghanshyam Prasad Swami did was he soaked both the tuerni dal and the rice together in the water. Now for anybody who's been cooking would know that this is a big mistake. Once he washed everything, he continued to simmer them together. Now a big mistake over here is that the rice will cook faster than the dal. And so as a result, he ended up preparing a concoction of cooked rice and raw dal. So the khichdi didn't turn out too well. Obviously, Ghanshyam Swami's enthusiasm evaporated very quickly and he turned into panic. He was so worried, and that thinking that so much food will be wasted, and if Pramukh Swami Maharaj comes to know, I've had it. And just then Pramukh Swami Maharaj entered the kitchen, and life is very very peculiar. Things like this happen when you least want them to happen, and this is exactly what happened to Ghanshyam. Now Ghanshyam Swami noticed that he had made a mistake, so he very openly admitted to Swamishri that the khichdi hasn't been soaked or hasn't been cooked properly. It's still raw. The rice was cooked, but the dal was still very raw and uncooked. And Swami heard this, and he pressed a few grains and he noticed the half-cooked mixture. So immediately he figured out what had actually happened. Swami was a very proficient cook. He was very good at this. And so very comfortingly he asked Ghanshyam Swami, he goes, how did you soak the dal and the rice? And Ghanshyam Swami explained, he said, I just did it like we normally do, magni dal and rice. This is how I mixed it normally. And then Swami had suspected this, and so he taught Ghanshyam Swami the correct way to prepare this type of khichdi. And very patiently he explained to Swami that for khichdi of tuerni dal, you don't soak them together. You first soak dal separately, and then you soak the rice in a different utensil. You soak that separately as well. And once the water reaches boiling point, you add tuerni dal. Mix the rice only once the dal has turned soft, and as a result you will get very good chutti khichdi, very loose khichdi like this. So this was something Swami explained to Ghanshyam Swami. Having given this class to Ghanshyam Swami, it's also interesting to know that he didn't tell him off or anything like that, but Swami also made sure, he told him that once the khichdi is ready, make sure you offer it to Thakurji, and then you offer it to the devotees. He asked him to prepare the khichdi again. Explain to Ghanshyam Swami that the dish cannot be prepared. You can't offer something to Thakurji that you can't eat or offer to Hari Bhaktos as well. But even after teaching Ghanshyam Swami the correct way of making the khichdi, Swamishri still stood there in support and personally watched over all the preparations until it was cooked successfully. Now, despite being so tied up with all the preparations for the Utsav, he specially took time out to teach and train just these finer details to Ghanshyam Swami. It's a mark of a true leader in the way he would actually train people. Now, with this incident, not only did Swamishri prepare the khichdi, but he also trained a very skilled Bhandari. Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often, many years later, he would often say that Ghanshyam Swami ne lakh માણસની રસોઈ બનાવવાની હોય ને તો પણ પેટમાં પાણી ના હાલે. And this is what all due to Swamishri's training. Let's move on to K2. Now, during one of the many late nights in Bhadra, Swamishri proceeded on a round at the river Und, at the grounds, at around about 1:30 a.m. to check on the ongoing preparation work for the upcoming festivals. He also served snacks to the volunteers who were there engaged in this seva at that time. And then he sat on a mound of sand and called over a very familiar face, a local Patel from the village. Now, the house that this Patel owned had been obstructing the work for the Mandir campus for quite some time. Basically, it was right in the middle of the plot that we wanted, that we were building the Mandir. And so Yogiji Maharaj wanted to buy the property, and he had requested Pramukh Swami Maharaj to do this. Yogiji Maharaj's wish was naturally Pramukh Swami Maharaj's highest command, and that was his job to fulfill. Now, as a result, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had many a time requested this Patel to sell his house to the Mandir, but with not much luck. Now, once again, Swami attempted to convince this Patel to sell the house. However, he was very unwilling to yield at any cost. And at around about 2:30 a.m., the others began heading away back to the village. Swamishri continued to talk to him. Now, at around 3 a.m., Swami is still talking to him. They got closer to the village because they were quite far away from there. They walked closer to the village. They reached the Mandir campus. Pramukh Swami Maharaj then held his hand at the Mandir gate, and then in a very gentle tone he pleaded to him. He said, "Look, Patel, please agree with this and accept the offer. Bapa," meaning Yogiji Maharaj, "will be very, very pleased with you. We're not trying to snatch anything away from you. And we're willing to pay you the full amount to buy the house. You'll receive a much better place than this, and you have Bapa's blessings." Eventually, the Patel agreed to sell his house to the Mandir at a very reasonable price. Now, after the Patel left, Swamishri then turned to the Sevak Sadhus, and he said, "Patel bhare katha nikalya. આ તો યોગી બાપાની ઈચ્છા હતી તે માંડ પાર પડ્યું." Now we just heard that how Pramukh Swami Maharaj had spent so much time trying to convince this gentleman to sell his property. Yet, when something like this happens, he was first to give the credit to his guru, Yogiji Maharaj. And even in a private and a casual conversation, after such a taxing night, he never lost sight of his guru. So this was something very nice to see, that Pramukh Swami Maharaj is Guru Bhakti over here in this chapter. The next day, some of the legal processes were completed. The possession of the house was also taken. And then Swamishri, he sent everyone to level the structure, the whole house, in order to continue the work. Now, even Pramukh Swami Maharaj joined in this seva. He lifted the rubble stones, carried them on his head from one place to another. Mandan Bhagat, who was there at that time, he saw this, and immediately he asked Swamishri not to do this kind of work. He says, "Ame badha to chhe જ નહીં, we're all over here, we'll take care of it." Swami said, his response to the Bhagat was very nice. "Tame badha to છો, you are all here, but only you will benefit. What about me? Tame seva karso so you will benefit, but what about me? Mare to seva baki rahi jase ne. So please let me do it. Here at this place, thard will be offered to Thakurji. Sadhus and devotees will eat. Now this seva is such that even the avatars would not get." So Swami te wakhate khub mahima thi આ બધી વાતો કરી છે. And then obviously, along with serving in all the other various departments of the celebrations, Pramukh Swami Maharaj also made sure that the village, Bhadra village, was also provided with the necessary facilities that included the construction of a road from the railway station to the village, as well as from the village to the owned a river. Now this would make it much easier for all the locals. Let's move on to K3. Now, during the meetings regarding the Mandir Mahotsav in Bhadra, a discussion was held to decide which murtis were to be consecrated in the new mandir. Again, Swami was obviously very instrumental in this. It was Yogiji Maharaj's sankalp, his wish to build this mandir. But Swamishri was very much involved in all the processes of the construction of the mandir. So some of the senior Haribhaktas who were there were of the opinion that only two marble murtis of Akshar Purushottam needed to be consecrated. Basically, Bej Murti Pratishtha Karwani, Akshar and Purushottam. Now, Yogi Baba's wish was to have three murtis of Dham, Dhami and Mukta, meaning Gunatinand Swami, Bhagwan Swaminarayan and Gopalanand Swami in the Garbhagriha. So Yogi Baba did not firmly vocalize his position on this, but just like he did on many other occasions, and he just went on to say, do as Pramukh Swami Maharaj says, because they all approached Yogi Baba, ke su karu? And Yogi Baba eventually says, just do whatever Pramukh Swami Maharaj suggests. And Swamishri knew straight away what Yogiji Maharaj wanted, and why he had left the decision to Pramukh Swami Maharaj to make. So then eventually Pramukh Swami Maharaj suggested to everybody and says, look, we can consecrate. He gave them two options. Basically, one was that we can consecrate or do pratishtha of three marble murtis, or we can do the pratishtha of the painted murtis of Akshar and Purushottam. And naturally, very readily everybody agreed upon installing the three marble murtis in Bhadra, which we see even today. And so these were the murtis that were decided by Pramukh Swami Maharaj based on Yogiji Maharaj's wish. And as a result, Yogi Baba was immensely pleased with Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Let's move on to K4 now. Now, amidst all the challenges and pressures of the celebrations in Bhadra, Swamishri was invited to conduct a Parayan in Muri. Now, you can imagine on one end all the preparations are carrying on, and then on the other side, Swami gets an invitation to do a Parayan in Muri. So obviously there's a lot of balancing work needed over here. And so while doing making sure that the preparation work for the celebrations still carry on, Swamishri then went to Muri. He honored the invitation, delivered a Parayan on the second section of the Satsang Jivan, and then Swamishri had already completed the task of arranging the pipeline out of the river in Bhadra. So this was before leaving for Muri to deliver the Parayan. After doing the Parayan in Muri, he quickly visited the villages and towns which were nearby. Again, something very typical of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Naturally he was able to kill two birds with one stone. The visit to Muri allowed him to make a quick visit to Fulgram, Baldana, Limbdi, Rajkot, Padadri, Jaiva, and Bhadral. And then after all this, Swami then came back to Bhadra to continue the preparations for the festivities. Now, by the time Swamishri came back to Bhadra, Yogiji Maharaj had already arrived. Yogi Baba was extremely pleased to see all the work that had been completed under Swamishri's guidance. Now, parallel to all this, the new school in Gondal had also scheduled their annual function. So, and they had invited Pramukh Swami Maharaj to the event. It was natural that to invite Pramukh Swami Maharaj to all these things, all these events. And once again, Swamishri then left Bhadra to grace this occasion. He pleased all the students and the staff. Again, we can see the balancing act over here. A lot of work going on in Bhadra. He had to go to Muri, came back to Bhadra. Now he's going to Gondal. And again, Swami then made his way back to, from Gondal, Swami went back to Bhadra. He stayed one day in Bhadra and he started off his Vicharan again. This time he was traveling to Kanam and Charotar. Now, while Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Muri, the Kothari of Bochasan had requested Pramukh Swami Maharaj to attend the Chaitri festival, Chaitri Punam festival in Bochasan. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj was so tied up, so Swami had naturally said no at that time. However, due to everyone's request, eventually Swamishri obviously caved in to the pressure, and not just that, but again, visiting this festival in Bochasan was an important occasion for him to go to. So he changed all his plans and eventually did make it to Bochasan for the celebrations. Now, let's move on to the next. Now we can look at in this slide we can see the travels over here. From Bochasan, Swamishri then visited Atladra, Ahmedabad, Sarangpur, Rajkot, and then back to Bhadra. So on the slide, we can see from Bhadra, Swami went to Muri. From Muri, Swami came back to Bhadra. From Bhadra, Swami went to Gondar. From Gondar, Swami came back to Bhadra for a day and then went all the way back to Kanam. He did his Vicharan in Kanam, which is near Atladra, in that area over there. So a lot of traveling going on during this time. So from Bochasan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then visited Atladra, Ahmedabad, Sarangpur, Rajkot, and again back to Bhadra. So within a span of a month, during all these preparations, Pramukh Swami Maharaj managed to squeeze in and travel to across 12 villages and towns. And despite the major celebrations in Bhadra, he still attended to the ongoing celebrations such as the Poonam festival in Bochasan. He managed to deliver the Parayans in Muri. Not only that, he was also able to entertain the invitation from the pupils in Gondal at the Vidya Mandir. So we can see an incredible ability to plan and juggle so many things just at once without compromising any of the other projects. Again, another very interesting aspect of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Let's move on to K5 now. Now, the celebrations were still 3 weeks away, but Yogiji Maharaj obviously decided to get there much earlier. And it almost seemed that, all the places that were associated with Gunadharan Swami had a very unique appeal to Yogiji Maharaj. We know from previous readings and readings of Yogiji Maharaj's biography, as well as Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Jivan Charitra, that Yogiji Maharaj was very, very connected to Junagadh, because that was where Gunadharan Swami had spent almost 40 years as the Mahant. And obviously Yogiji Maharaj had also spent his initial years as a sadhu in Junagadh. Now Gondal was also very, very close to Yogi Bapa's heart, because this was the place where Gunadharan Swami left his mortal body. And so naturally the birthplace of Gunadharan Swami, Bhadra, had also got a special appeal and a special pull to Yogiji Maharaj. So that's why he was there much, much earlier than he would normally be at other events. Now during an early morning discourse in Bhadra, Yogiji Maharaj stated something very interesting. Now, this is our last mandir. From now onwards, Pramukh Swami will build mandirs. So there was a Hari Bhakt over there, Kusum Rai Diwan, and he asked Yogi Bapa, I said, Bapa, why are you saying so? You still have so many mandirs to build. As soon as Yogiji Maharaj heard this, Yogi Bapa said, this is the last Shikharbad Mandir. We must keep sadhus in Shikharbad Mandirs. However, we do not have that many sadhus. We want to still initiate 700 sadhus, so that we can have 100 sadhus in each mandir, wherein 50 sadhus would stay in the mandir, while 50 sadhus would perform Vicharan. Pramukh Swami will initiate those sadhus. Now, Yogiji Maharaj is still there, yet Yogi Bapa is prophesying and giving everybody a hint that all the mandirs will be built by Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Not just that, but he also expressed his wish of initiating 700 sadhus and said that Pramukh Swami Maharaj will complete that wish. All the Hari Bhaktas were very deeply overwhelmed by Yogi Bapa's words. They had seen Pramukh Swami Maharaj, who was always engaged in construction seva in the scorching sun. The Pramukh Swami Maharaj that they had seen was a sadhu who was busy digging and filling the pits, obviously covered with lots of soil and dust from head to toe. This was the Pramukh Swami Maharaj that they had seen, who would comfortably sleep on the mound of sand at a construction site. And here Yogiji Maharaj was revealing Pramukh Swami Maharaj's true greatness. Pramukh Swami Maharaj pote diksha apwana tha. And it reminds us of something that had been said about Gunadharan Swami. કે સ્વામી પણ કેવા છે તો ચિત્રે વીટેલું રતન જેવું છે, almost like a gem that had been draped in ragged clothes. So this was something very interesting that we noticed about the life of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Now the Pratishta celebrations began with a yagna on the 21st of April. Now for the next 3 days, the entire village had been shut down. Shut down meaning they had all joined into the celebrations. Even the food, everything was going to be supplied and served at the mandir. So Gujarati ma ke ne gam dumado band karelo. So everybody was going to be eating at the mandir. So little total shutdown at the village. Now a Diksha ceremony and a Nagar Yatra also took place on the 22nd of April. During the Nagar Yatra, Yogi Ji Maharaj, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Mahan Sai Maharaj and others, they sat in carts to join the colorful procession around the village of Bhadra. The main Murti Pratishtha ceremony was performed on the 23rd of April, and the beautiful marble murtis of Akshar Purushottam Maharaj, which are still there today, of Akshar Purushottam Maharaj as well as Gopalan Swami, were ritually consecrated at the pious hands of Yogi Ji Maharaj and placed in the at the central shrine of Bhadra Mandir. A ceremonial salute of 51 cannons was also performed in honor of Maharaj and Swami during the Utsav. Now, after the Pratishta, Yogi Ji Maharaj then left Bhadra to go to Gondal. Swamishri then, in the meantime, stayed back for the next 3 days in winding up the event. And a very short entry in his daily diary on the 26th of April makes it very apparent the precision with which he administered the entire celebrations. And he writes in his diary, Aje tamam vastu parat mokli, Aje tamam vastu parat mokli didi. Koi pan vastu khuti nathi. Today, we returned all the things. Not a single item was missing. Such a complete and clear audit of the celebrations. Despite insufficient facilities, few volunteers, and insufficient means, Pramukh Swami Maharaj concluded the Pratishtha ceremony in Bhadra so remarkably. Swamishri then travelled to Gondal and then to Mawa. Now in Mawa, he held a meeting with the engineers and architects to discuss details of the construction plans for a Hari Mandir that was to be built on the birthplace of Bhagaji Maharaj. Now this too was also one of Yogi Ji Maharaj's wishes. Swamishri then outlined the timeline for the Mawa Mandir construction project. From there, Pramukh Swami Maharaj came to Nadiyad and updated Yogi Ji Maharaj on the progress of the construction of the Hari Mandir in Mawa. It's interesting to see how the Mandir in Dhari had just been completed. The Mandir in Bhadra had just been completed, and now he's moving on to the next project, which is the project in Mawa. So from one project to another project. Let's move on to K7. So eventually, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then made his way to Atladra. Now, why was he going to Atladra? An All India Youth Convention had been organized in Atladra. Youth from all over India had flocked to participate in this convention. Almost 500 youths had gathered in Atladra. 350 of them were delegates, and about 150 were volunteers to help the convention. Now, at the time of the convention, Yogi Ji Maharaj was away in Chansad at that time for the Murti Pratishtha ceremony of a newly constructed mandir, which was made for the ladies, for the women in the village at that time. Meanwhile, in Atladra, the youth convention was inaugurated in the presence of Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Mahan Sai Maharaj. Both Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Mahan Sai Maharaj were very ceremoniously welcomed with a marching band, as if Yogi Ji Maharaj was there. And in the inaugural address, Pramukh Swami Maharaj explained to everybody the purpose of the convention and how important it was for them to participate in all these competitions. Now, with the Pramukh Swami Maharaj Shatabdi just around the corner, many of us may be aware that the Gujarat government are helping with the redevelopment of Chansad, which is the birthplace of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Now, it's interesting to see how when Yogi Ji Maharaj was in Chansad during that time, he remembered Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And he said to everybody that everyone must visit Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthplace for darshan. Now, Swamishri's Purvashram elder brother, Daya Bhai, had arranged everything for Yogi Ji Maharaj's Padramni to the house. Yogi Ji Maharaj arrived at Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthplace at around 4:30 p.m. and began offering danvats in the room where Pramukh Swami Maharaj was born. An incredible gesture from Yogi Ji Maharaj, doing danvats at the place of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Now, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was, his disciple. Yet, Yogi Ji Maharaj is offering danvats at this place as well. Yogi Ji Maharaj then instructed everybody who was there accompanying that everybody should offer at least 7 danvats at Swamishri's birthplace. And then Yogiji Maharaj went on to say, કે આ તો પ્રમુખ સ્વામીની જન્મભૂમિ. ઓહોહો, આપણા કેવા ભાગ્ય કે શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજે કૃપા કરીને આપણને પ્રમુખ સ્વામી આપ્યા. પ્રમુખ સ્વામી સાક્ષાત સાધુતાની મૂર્તિ, સર્વગુણે સંપન્ન, બહુ નિર્માણી. ભવિષ્યમાં આ સ્થાનના દર્શન કરવા હજારો માણસો આવશે. Now, I mean, very powerful words from Yogiji Maharaj. You know, that this is Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthplace. How fortunate we are all that Shastriji Maharaj had compassionately handed us Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Pramukh Swami Maharaj is the manifest embodiment of saintliness. You know, with full of noble virtues, very, very humble. And then Yogi Bapa goes on to say that in the future, thousands of people will come here for darshan of this place. And you know, many of us are witness to this, that even today, thousands of people go to Chansad for for Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthplace, darshan of Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthplace. Let's move on to K9. Now, the 78th birth anniversary of Yogiji Maharaj was scheduled to be celebrated in Atladra. A pavilion was created on the grounds of Kala Bhavan. A murti of Akshar Purushottam was placed on the stage. Now, there was something unique about this murti. It was made out of ghee, and it was the first time in the history of the sampradaya. During that time, making a murti out of ghee was something very, very novel, and at that time, it was a good expression of the devotion of all the santos and the Hari Bhaktas at that time who made this murti. Now, this murti had been prepared and placed on the stage. The seats for Pramukh Swami Maharaj and the dignitaries were also placed next to Yogiji Maharaj on the stage. Yogi Bapa's 78th birthday was also celebrated in the presence of over 10,000 devotees. Now, after the celebrations, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then travelled to Bochasan, and he notes in his diary the reason for this daily journal. Think about it. Swami said, Bapore motorma Bochasan, Ukarda, Jhajra, તેમજ બીજા બાંધકામ અંગે વાતચીત કરી. રાત્રે પાછા અટલાદરા. I'll say this in English. In the afternoon, we reached Bochasan in a car, motorma. Meetings regarding food waste and litter waste, or basically litter management, latrine and other construction works, and then back to Atladra. So Swami details these little things in his diary. It's very short, yet very significant notes that were scribbled in his work. But he explains and reveals the scope of his work. You know, from managing grand celebrations of huge mandirs to maintaining gutter drains. You know, traveling 40 miles from Atladra to Bochasan and then back just to discuss the construction of these toilets and drains. Swamishri was involved in every single level of BAPS. We can see this from these little notes over here. Go on to the next slide now, K10. So during his Vicharan, Swamishri traveled to a Vicharan called Karwan. Now, two families in this village had a quarrel over a common road in their backyard that had connected the two houses. And there was also some rift about the jewelry that was found in an old safe. The animosity between them had become so volatile that they were on the verge of violence. And this does tend to happen a lot. However, Swamishri mediated between both families and calmed them down. Something that we have seen throughout Swamishri's life. He always acted as a mediator. For Swamishri, you know, every Satsangi family was his own personal family. And as the houses of these families were side by side, Swamishri had to shuttle between the two houses. For the first 10 minutes, he would listen to the arguments of one family in their house, and then he would get up and walk to another house, to the other house. He would listen to them for the next 10 minutes, and then again he would walk back to the first house and try to bring some sort of reconciliation, some common ground. Now, in this manner, you know, Swami made several rounds between the two houses, from one house to the other. But eventually, Swami was able to unite both the families and resolve their quarrel, which is very commendable. You know, Swami had always said that in the joy of others lies our own. And this is exactly what we see in this incident as well. Both the families were very, very grateful for Pramukh Swami Maharaj's advice and intervention. And they also said that, you know, had Pramukh Swami Maharaj not intervened, this situation, it could have resulted in bloodshed. So once again, we see Pramukh Swami Maharaj, a very nice aspect of Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life over here. Now, Swamishri had helped to resolve so many family issues like this one. And for Pramukh Swami Maharaj, each family, as we mentioned earlier on, was like his own family. And this can be seen in the way he took such keen interest in helping each of these families. Eventually, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then traveled from Karwan. He went to Lingasthadi. Yogiji Maharaj was already over here. The reason for traveling there was because Yogiji Maharaj was going to perform the Murti Pratishta of a Hari Mandir in Lingasthadi. Now, after this event, Yogiji Maharaj was scheduled to go to Dhavat to perform the groundbreaking ritual of a mandir that was going to be consecrated in this village as well. However, Yogiji Maharaj had to unexpectedly depart for Dharmaj, and so he asked Pramukh Swami Maharaj to go to Dhavat to perform the ceremony over there. Swamishri immediately dropped everything else. He changed his plans and then made his way to Dhavat to again perform the rituals over there. It's very interesting to see how so much is going on during this time as well. You know, sometimes we hear about thousands of 1,000 mandirs in BAPS, but when we look back at the Jivan Charitra, we can see how, you know, gradually the progress has taken place. But at the root of it, we can see the efforts of Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Yogiji Maharaj. Let's move on to K11. Swamishri then left Dhavat to go to Choranda. Now, the mode of transport in this region had now changed. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was now traveling in an oxen cart. You know, Swami had often traveled by car, by train, by bus. Now the mode of transport had changed to an oxen cart. His accommodation at the was located at the local mandir. While Swami was there, Swami did a lot of house visits. He did a lot of padramnis during his stay in Choranda. Now, during one of the padramnis, Pramukh Swami Maharaj also visited a Hari Bhakta's house to bless and offer prayers to bless a well that he had just dug to supply for good water. Now, it's interesting to see that Swami is visiting from one house to another house, but there are also requests that, you know, that Pramukh Swami Maharaj come and bless a well. And Swami continued his journey throughout this region in a cart. Eventually, Pramukh Swami Maharaj made his way to Saring. Now, while Swami was in Saring, the mornings in Saring would begin with a morning discourse, which were then followed by padramnis. He would visit and bless the homes of all the Hari Bhaktas over there, but he would also bless the shops. And people had so much faith in Pramukh Swami Maharaj that they wanted to, and they felt that, you know, every blessing, every visit by Pramukh Swami Maharaj was a blessing of goodwill and, you know, of fortune. And so they would often request Pramukh Swami Maharaj to visit their houses, the wells, the farms, the shops, other holdings. And even Pramukh Swami Maharaj, you could see that he was also very, very enthusiastic to entertain every single request like this. And this was, again, throughout Swamishri's life, this would resonate in the same way. Now, there was a river flowing on the outskirts of Saring. The river had been blessed by Shastriji Maharaj and Yogiji Maharaj. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj also took time to take a bath in this river, again, remembering his gurus as well. We've talked about this in the earlier sessions as well. Wherever there was a river or something like this that was consecrated by Bhagwan Swaminarayan, Shastriji Maharaj or Yogiji Maharaj, Pramukh Swami Maharaj would make sure that he took the blessings accordingly as well. Swami then continued his travels in a cart again from Saring to Matroj. Eventually, Swami went to Thikaria and Simalia. Swami then boarded a train from Palej to the Vishwamitri station and eventually made his way to Atladra. He made a 2-day stop in Atladra and then continued his return again to Sokda, Shrijipura, Ahmedabad, Sarangpur and Gadra, and then finally Pramukh Swami Maharaj made his way to Porbandar. Let's move on to K12. So a large public gathering had been organized in Porbandar. Now this was in the presence of Yogiji Maharaj. Now Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Puja Mohan Swami Maharaj and many other senior devotees also spoke in the Sabha in Porbandar. The following day, they all visited the Swaminarayan Mandir and did darshan of the Sudama Mandir, the Kirti Mandir, Bharat Mandir and other sacred places that were well known in the town. From Porbandar, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then first travelled to Gorana and then went to Dhoraji. Now the Satsang community in Dhoraji was relatively small, but nevertheless, the enthusiasm was very warm and very welcoming. The devotees had very lovingly organized a parayan for Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And then Swamishri obviously caved in to their love and affection and began a parayan on the Harilila Kalpataru. Now, along with the parayan, every morning, a devotional morning procession known as a Prabhat Ferry would also take place. The time was 5 a.m. So imagine Swami had to deliver not just had to participate in the Prabhat Ferry, which is at 5 a.m., but throughout the day, Swami had to deliver discourses along with the parayan. So we can see that in the evenings, sabhas were organized where Pramukh Swami Maharaj as well as Puja Mahan Swami Maharaj, they would address the gathering over there. Now, during his stay in Dhoraji, Pramukh Swami Maharaj also arranged for a darshan visit to all the prasadi places, all the sanctified places in Dhoraji, which included Lalwad, the Swaminarayan Mandir, and the place where Ramanand Swami had arranged for alms distribution for the needy. Swami then eventually made his way to Amreli after leaving Lalwad and Dhoraji. He made his way to Amreli and eventually got to Dhari. Dhari is the birthplace of Yogiji Maharaj, and so naturally Pramukh Swami Maharaj was very, very excited to be there. And he made sure that he did darshan at Yogiji Maharaj's birthplace. It was also Pramukh Swami Maharaj's wish to build a mandir in Dhari. So during previous visits, he had already initiated the work, but during this visit, Swami held in particular discussions on buying the houses which were next to Yogiji Maharaj's birthplace. And while Swami was in Dhari, he made sure that he visited Yogiji Maharaj's school, the Patariyo Dharo, where Jina Bhai, basically Yogiji Maharaj would also meditate after bathing during his childhood. And then eventually Pramukh Swami Maharaj then made his way to Maua. And while they were in Maua, Pramukh Swami Maharaj performed the groundbreaking rituals at the birthplace of Bhagaji Maharaj to begin the construction work for a new mandir. Pramukh Swami Maharaj also made sure that he did darshan at the old Swaminarayan Mandir and Bhagaji Maharaj Smriti Sthan, basically the place where the final rites had also been performed. And then eventually Pramukh Swami Maharaj made his way to Junagadh. During these travels, one thing that is very notable is how Pramukh Swami Maharaj would make sure that he also visited all the prasadi places at every village that he would go to. We're going to end today's session over here. We will continue in the next session. Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwanani Jai.